Today I'm going to finish drawing this idyllic village view in Pensford, England. So if you missed part one and you're interested in seeing how I made my way to this point, definitely go back and watch that one first. If, however, you couldn't care less and you just want to watch this one, understood. In that case, change nothing. Let's get into it. As you can see, the bottom half of the drawing is practically complete, so save for a few minor additions, today is all about this upper half. You'll notice that I'm starting with the windows rather than building out the silhouettes of these buildings, and while I really loathe drawing windows, for reasons I've discussed way too many times in these videos, I think this order of operations made a lot more sense. And why is that? Well, if you look at the reference, there's about a window-sized space between the leftmost window on that yellow building and the start of the bridge. It's nearly perfect. That gives me something of a stepping stone as I work my way out to the right from where I left off yesterday. Then you can see that the gap between the bottom windows and the top ones is also window size, this time vertically. So these windows, they offer me a pretty accurate roadmap throughout this part of the drawing, whereas simply drawing the entire silhouette of the building or buildings without much to measure against could throw off the proportions wildly. That said, as always, looking at these scenes in person versus after the fact is a completely different experience. So now I see that I also could have taken the height of the bridge and roughly measured the house on the left with that. But I didn't see that in the moment, so my windows will have to do. Unfortunately, despite all the talk about measurements, I still go ahead and botch the spacing between the right side windows and that seam between the two buildings. There's not nearly enough space, and I really don't know how it happened. Ultimately, stuff like that doesn't matter really at all, but it's interesting to see what things totally fly under the radar when so much consideration went into other things. I'm excited for the possible future where stuff like this reveals itself to me more completely. I don't know, maybe more and more as time goes on, these little proportional mistakes will lessen. I don't expect them to disappear entirely, but it would be nice if my ability to assess a scene could get to a point where the more obvious stuff, the more obvious mistakes like this one, don't really happen unless I'm particularly rushed or distracted. And then from there, how much better my sense of everything else would be. It's interesting to think about. Anyway, if you've been following along for the past week, you'll know that our good friend Rowan has been staying with us in Cardiff, driving us around all over the place, and most importantly, sitting down with me to draw. He talked a little bit about his experience doing so in the waterfall video, which you should go check out if you haven't already. And he's back today for his final drawing with me to do the same. So let's hear what he has to say about this one.
Hello again. If you haven't heard my voice before, it's probably because you're not subscribed and you're missing out on Zach Leon Gold. Either that or Zach has edited me out of the other voiceover from a few drawings back. You remember the awful one of the waterfall, or at least the one that vaguely resembled a waterfall? Anyway, I'm back for this one. I've also been drawing alongside Zach for the other videos since the waterfall, but I guess he didn't want my incredible drawing progression and beautiful soothing tones to outshine his production. So, no, I'm just kidding, of course. I've just been working and then lazy when I'm not working, so I didn't manage to get a voice note made in time. I've just been told before recording this that the video is a two-parter, so that's really exciting, and maybe this will just be a nice break from hearing Zach yap on about perspective and lighting and other drawing-related vocab. Instead, you can just listen to me chat about it, I guess. So this spot is in a village just down the lane from my family home, the place that I grew up, and it's not lost on me how scenic this area is, and how I imagine a lot of people think of a quintessential English village. I'm very lucky to have grown up in what appears to be a fairy tale. If only you could see the view behind our drawing spot. Zach may have already mentioned it, but we actually started over by the dark green door that you can see in the reference video, facing the other way. The view looks out across the river to this church tower that's nestled amongst a few buildings not dissimilar to the ones here, and it's backdropped by this huge disused Victorian stone viaduct. The most picturesque scene you'll ever see. Side note, for anyone in the UK in the mid-2000s that remembered when analog TV got switched over to digital, you might remember the adverts of the little robot wheeling around the UK to tell people to get ready to go digital. Well, one of those ads sees a little robot wheel over this very bridge with the aforementioned view in the background. It's a pretty big moment for this otherwise forgotten village in the middle of nowhere. Anywho, the sun was starting to go down, everything looked really pretty, very amazing, but no. Zach decided he'd rather have his back to all of that. Probably because he was scared to draw it, I guess. But more likely because it was backlit by the setting sun, which may have looked terrible on video. The buildings would have been in shadow, the lighting would have changed a lot over the course of the video, and the actual spot for drawing was literally the doorstep of that house on the bridge to avoid not being sat in the road. So after a bit of moving about, we found this vantage point that he was happy with, right in the gateway to the church, which is now someone's home, and with the last 30 minutes of decent light, we set about our drawing. It's safe to say I much prefer drawing man-made structures than natural scenes. The waterfall was probably the hardest of all the drawings that I joined in with, possibly because it was my first, but something about natural detail and random lines makes it much harder to portray. With a building, however, it's more about getting the correct perspective. And so begins the drawing vocab. But the lines are mostly straight. Sometimes it's just hard to gauge if the lines go up or down, depending on if the building is going away from you or towards you. These buildings were at a bit of an angle to us, but I decided to draw them straight on. Subconsciously, of course, I didn't do it on purpose, but it definitely made things a lot easier for the drawing. Zach and I discussed this a lot for the week that I was with him. I know I mentioned it last time with the waterfall drawing, but making something physically there in front of you into a 2D thing on paper is really hard. But if something is perfectly flat on, it almost lacks depth and will just look odd on paper. A couple of bits I wanted to mention. Roof tiles, really difficult. I think Zach's done a way better job here with some kind of wavy lines, whereas I just ignored what was actually there and just put in some kind of fainter grid lines so that at least I had some kind of texture being represented. I put a few very small wavy bits in, but not confidently enough, and only for about 5% of the roof space. I basically got scared. And I also wish buildings didn't have windows. In real life, these ones are pretty much all the same, but drawing something identically multiple times over is near impossible. Luckily, you didn't have to see my drawing of Tembe. It was genuinely just nothing but windows in that scene. Also, do I add depth to the window frames, or just leave them as lines, like I have done, for the middle frames at least? And if I do that, does that mean that shading the windows in, rather than leaving them white, will detract from the lines that represent the frames? All difficult conundrums that I struggled with at the time. And essentially I just took the easier options. And clouds. Should I even bother with clouds? Do a few scratchy lines suffice, or do they just look really bad? And finally, I wanted to talk about using fine liner again. Like last time, I did this in pencil and then went over it in pen. In school, during design and technology lessons, or whatever you called it, resistant materials, product design, woodwork, whatever you called it, when drawing a design, I was taught to imagine a little bug on the page. If that bug was walking along your image, bear with me here, if that bug was walking along your image and got to a line that, if the drawing was in 3D, it would fall off, i.e. you're trying to represent space between two things where you don't see a gap, then that line should be thick, or at least you would go over it with a thicker point fine liner. Whereas if you needed to draw a line, but there was no depth between the two things, then the line would be thin. The bug could just walk straight across without falling off. So as an example in this drawing, the line between the two buildings that you can see is thinner because they're on the same plane. One wall just joins the other, so the bug could just essentially walk straight across. But the line at the edge of the house on the left is thicker because it drops off into the background behind it. Equally, the line at the top of the wall in the foreground is thicker, because if my imaginary bug walked over it, then it would have quite a fall. I don't know if I explained that very well, but luckily, this was my last drawing with Zach, so I'll just leave you with that artistic existential crisis to deal with. Maybe I'll be back one day in this drawing series. Some plans for future travel are being made, so watch this space and subscribe so you can listen to me ramble on once again.
Coincidentally, since Rowan recorded that, those travel plans that he was talking about have been confirmed. He bought his tickets last night. These videos are a bit delayed, so sorry if that's confusing, but yeah, this won't be the last you'll hear from our friend Rowan, because whether he likes it or not, he will draw again, and I will convince him to talk to us. Anyway, big thanks to Rowan for doing this with me. I don't know a lot of people who would, so it's great to have someone around who's kind of just up for stuff, especially stuff like this. I'm not sure if I mentioned it, probably have, but he's the first person I ever spoke to about this whole project. And for weeks, I'd just throw at him my ideas, my concerns, alterations, all that stuff. And he was a big help and a great motivator. In large part, he's to thank for this coming to fruition. So, I don't know, go ahead and let him know in the comments how much you appreciate him or something like that. I'm sure he'd love it. And here we are, and I like it. Detail-wise especially, I'm feeling really good about this one. There's a sharpness to everything, which is unlike me, but I'm really happy with the way this one turned out. No wonder it took so long. The variety of textures in particular, I'm excited about, and thankfully the water at the bottom ended up working out in the end. Now let's take a look at Rowan's, and awesome. Completely different outcome, such a deviation stylistically, and I'd be over the moon with this one if I were him. There's so much pop to his version, and I think it represents perfectly his concept about the line weight and the bugs. Also, his foreground edition is particularly cool with that wall that curves around. And at first I wondered where that came from, but then I remembered that he was positioned about 10 feet or so behind me. And that wall is the wall that you can see in front of me in the drawing video. Anyway, so much fun. So let me know what you think in the comments. If you liked the video, go ahead and like it. And if you're enjoying this series in general, subscribe to the channel. I appreciate you for taking the time to watch this one, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.